Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to the virtual Riverside Insect Fair. It is a pleasure to have you all. Today, we are welcoming Dr. Alec Gary today to be presenting. So the way that the entire activity today will be hosting as well as following up live panels, we will be able to give the presenter a few minutes so he can go ahead and present the information that he wants to include. And then afterwards, we will be answering questions. If you have any questions, you are able to go ahead and place a comment down below. We will be going through after the presentation and reiterating those so those can be asked. So you guys are more than welcome. So Dr. Alec Gary, he is a UC Riverside professor of veterinarian entomology. So welcome, Dr. Gary. You can go ahead and proceed.
Great, thank you, Crystal. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with citizens, residents of Riverside, and anyone else who is attending the Insect Virtual Fair. Longtime supporter of the Insect Virtual Fair. So really happy you guys are figured out a way to present it this year, even in a virtual format. So thank you for that, for all the work that you guys are doing. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to put up a presentation. Are we able to see the screen now? Crystal or anybody, can you see the screen? Yes. Says what's eating you? Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, so as Crystal mentioned, I am a professor of veterinary entomology. I teach a class in medical and veterinary entomology, and what that class is, it's a discussion of really a lot of the things that eat us as humans and also eat and bite animals. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things today, and hopefully you'll find them this interesting. And I do look forward to hearing some of your questions and being able to try to address some of the questions that audience members may have. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin and talk about what's eating you. There we go. So insects do eat us, in fact, and this picture shows a number of insects, some of which you may recognize and some of which you perhaps don't. So many of you probably recognize this insect over here in the upper left. That's a mosquito. Here's a tick in the middle on the left. Down in the lower left, this is a flea. We're going to get to see this flea again in just a moment. On the right is an insect we call a kissing bug, and we call it that because it tends to bite around the face and around the mouth and often leaves a whelp near the mouth, and so people say that they've been kissed by the insect. And then in the upper part here, these are insects that are near and dear to me because these insects feed on sheep and cattle, and they're an insect I've done a lot of research with in my many years at UC Riverside. So this is called a biting midge. But insects do, in fact, eat us, and they've been doing that for a very, very long time. So if we look at the picture on the top up here, you can see in the inlet here, there's a tick. So this is a tick that's actually on a dinosaur feather from 99 million years ago. So this is a feather that was captured in amber or tree sap, and the amber, that tree sap protected it. And for 99 million years, that tick and that feather sat in that tree sap until somebody found the piece of fossilized tree sap and found that there was a tick in it. So ticks have been around for a very, very long time. Now, of course, they weren't biting humans back then because there were no humans 99 million years ago, but they've been around biting animals, in this case, dinosaurs at that length of time. This one down here is another insect in amber. And so this insect is a mosquito, and this one was dated to 46 million years ago. So insects have been around biting animals for a very long time. Maybe that's one of the reasons that in Hollywood, they make all these movies of insects that are frightening or scary to us. Things like this Empire of the Ants. And you could think of any number of sort of scary movies with insects that are attacking people or biting people. Arachnophobia is another one with spiders. And so people perhaps have an innate fear of some of these insects because the insects bite us and feed on us. Now, many insects actually prefer to bite animals around us. So they would prefer to bite, for example, our pet dogs rather than biting us. One example of that is the flea. So there are many flea species, but many of the species that we run into here in our urban living situation, these are species that would actually prefer to bite our animals, our pet animals like dogs and cats. But if they can't find the dogs and cats, if the dogs and cats have maybe they went outside and the fleas are still inside the house, they will bite people. In the case of fleas, those bites are usually on the lower part of the body, like the legs. And that's because if you look at this flea over here, you'll see it doesn't have any wings. So fleas are wingless, and all they can do is jump. So they have a trouble feeding on people up very high, and instead they'll jump onto our legs and bite us down here on the legs. Fleas, of course, many of you may know that fleas are responsible for the transmission of a number of important diseases, including plague or Black Death historically. So some of you may have studied that in school. Another insect, and I'm using air quotes there for insect because this is really not an insect, but it's related to insects, is the tick. Ticks will also bite both pets and humans. So most ticks are not specialists on people. They'll bite our animals, our pets, like this dog. And so we can see a tick over here. This is on a human finger just to give us an idea of what that tick looks like. But when it begins feeding on the animal, ticks have an incredible ability to fill with blood. And so you can see this tick right here, which doesn't look anything like the tick on the left because it's so engorged with blood. It's got so much blood from this dog that it's feeding on that it expands its body to essentially look like a balloon. It's much bigger after it feeds than it is before it begins feeding. So ticks, like the fleas, are another group of, these are actually arthropods, but we'll call them insects generally, that feed on animals, but will bite humans as well. But there are some insects that do specialize on feeding on humans, on feeding on us, all of us. And so I'm going to talk briefly about a few of those, and perhaps some of you will have some questions about them later. The first is a pest that many of us actually had forgotten even existed because we had essentially eradicated it from the United States back in the 1950s, but it is resurging and making a comeback in the US, and that is the bed bug. And so the picture on the right shows you a bed bug on the top that's not feeding or unfed, and then one on the bottom that's actually feeding on me. So it's consuming my blood, and you can see that it's a little bit red now with my blood. And some of you might have heard the nursery rhyme, sleep tight and don't let the bed bugs bite. And the reason for that is because these bugs do feed at night. So they feed at night, they hide during the day and they come out at night. And if you have them in your house, they will crawl up into your bed and they'll bite you. And these bites often show up in clusters or groups like you see on the back of this gentleman here or on the back of this woman over here. So if you wake up in the morning and you find you have a bunch of bites in a cluster like that, you might have bed bugs in your house. Another insect that feeds on humans are lice. And so this is a play on the Of Mice and Men, if any of you have read that book. So I'm more interested in the lice and men. Lice, unlike the bed bugs, lice do not leave us during the day. Instead, they stay on our body all day and all night. So they live on us permanently. And they bite us regularly. And where they tend to bite, especially for head lice, is they tend to bite somewhere around the head underneath where the hair protects them and they're covered. And you can see one of the lice feeding over here on the skin. Now, eggs of lice are called nits, and you can see the eggs here on these hairs. So the lice actually glue their babies, glue their eggs to the hair. And so these nits are in the hair. And if you've ever heard the term of being nitpicky, that comes from the old days where we used to try to comb these nits out of people's hair to keep them from having lice. And it turns out lice have been with us for a very long time. They evolved with us as humans evolved from some earlier common ancestor of all of the great apes, of which humans are one. Lice were on that common ancestor and they evolved with humans, and they also evolved with chimpanzees over here, so that chimpanzees have their own lice and humans have their own lice. So each species of animal has its own lice, and those lice live on us permanently. We have two kinds of lice. We have head lice that live in our hair, and then we have body lice, and body lice actually live on our clothing. And it's thought that these two lice that have been with humans for a long time actually diverged. They became at least the body louse, became its own group when humans began wearing clothing, perhaps 200,000 years or so ago. So as we started first wearing clothes, some of these lice learned to live in our clothes instead of living in our hair. Which brings me to the point of one of the easiest way to get rid of lice is simply to have no body hair. So if you shave off the hair on your head, you will likely get rid of your head lice. Now, many of you women out there may not be too interested in doing that. For men, it's a relatively easy fix. Fortunately for women, we do have shampoos and things that have insecticides that can kill lice. So lice are relatively easily treated for most of us if you do find that you have them. Don't know what happened with that slide. There we go. I have to move on to the next one. So let's meet the last character of insects that eat us. And these are your mites, and some people call them face mites. Traditionally, they're actually called follicle mites because they live down in the follicles on your body. And so if we look at this picture up here, actually, let's look at this one. This is a hair, maybe a facial hair, for example, or an eyebrow hair that comes out of your skin. And way down deep inside the follicle where that hair begins, where the hair grows from, that's where these mites like to live. So they live down in here. They're very small, microscopic, but you can get a picture of them under a microscope, and this is what they look like. So they're kind of cute little creatures here with these long tails and multiple legs. And they feed on the secretions, the oils and things down at the base of your hair. So these are called human follicle mites. Turns out we all have them, or at least almost all of them. 98% of our population, perhaps 100% of our human population have them. And we all got them from our mothers. So just another thing you can blame your mother for, I suppose. So when you were born, these mites probably colonized your body from your mother's body when you were getting breast milk, when you were feeding from your mom. That's how we think that these mites pass from mother to child. And what's interesting about that is because these mites pass from mother to the children of that mother, we can actually follow the DNA of those mites follows the DNA of our genealogy, of our parents. So if you look at the mites that your grandmother and your mother and you have, you'll find that they are all, you share them in common, just like you share your DNA and your genes with your mother and your grandmother. And so it's really interesting that we can actually see these mites being related to multiple generations of people. So those are three insects that are very intimately associated with us, with humans, and feed just on us, or primarily on us. And that is the bed bugs, human lice, and follicle mites. And that's it for the presentation. But I wanted to ask now if there are any questions that any of you might have about insects that feed on people, including perhaps some of those other insects that we talked about before, like mosquitoes or ticks that might feed on other animals, but will also bite people. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I assume we're back to a gallery view of some sort.
All right, Dr. Jerry, we received one question. How long do these human feeding bugs live?
So the answer to that question is it varies. It really depends on the insect or on the bug. So some insects can live for a very long time. Most tick species, for example, have a life cycle that lasts for at least 1 year, maybe 2 years. Some ticks, we call them soft ticks. They tend to live in more desert-like environments. They can live for many years. Other insects live for a very short period of time. The mosquitoes that bite us, for example, probably live for a week to 2 weeks or even less than that, depending on the time of year. So it really depends on the insect that's biting us, how long that they would live.
Very interesting. Today we actually have joining with us Rosemary Kennedy Elementary School. And one of the questions that they are asking is, how can we get rid of mosquitoes biting us?
That's a great question. And there are lots of scientists and researchers that study that every day to try to figure out how we can protect ourselves from the bites of insects, including and especially mosquitoes. And the reason for that is mosquitoes are perhaps one of the more dangerous animals in the world to us humans. And that's because although they only take a small amount of blood and they don't harm us particularly that way, they can transmit a number of diseases, a number of pathogens, and make us very ill. And so because of that, mosquitoes are considered to be very dangerous. And so we put a lot of effort into trying to figure out how to control those mosquitoes or protect us from being bitten. Some ways that we can protect ourselves from being bitten by mosquitoes are by using repellents. There are several repellents. These are chemicals that the mosquitoes don't like. There are several repellents that you can purchase and you can use to put on your body or on your clothes. One of the more common ones is called DEET, D-E-E-T. And DEET, you can buy this in a spray can from Walmart or an outdoor hiking store or camping store. You can apply that material directly to your body, and the mosquitoes don't like it, and so they won't bite you through that. There are other chemicals that can be applied to clothes. There's a chemical called permethrin that you can apply to clothing, and this is something you could buy at a hiking store as well. And that protects you from mosquitoes and from ticks. And so those are things that if you're going to go outside, especially out hiking or camping in places where you might run into ticks or other insects, you might consider purchasing.
Thank you for that. We have another community member that is joining us through Facebook Live. And they had asked us, why do the follicle mites have such long tails?
Actually, it's a very interesting question because there are several species of follicle mites. Even humans have at least 2 species of follicle mites, one that has a very long tail, the one that I pictured, and another one that has a considerably shorter tail. Its scientific name actually is brevis, meaning short, because it has a short tail. So the question of why they have those tails at all, I can't answer for you, but I can tell you that the length of the tail is variable. I suspect it may have something to do with their reproductive ability or reproductive patterns and their ability to hold, for example, eggs that they would release and create the next generation. So that back part of the body is where much of the digestion and reproduction occurs with these insects. But yeah, why some of them have much longer tails than others, I don't know. That's evolution for you. Sometimes I'm sure there's a reason from the evolutionary perspective. There's some benefit to the insect, but I don't know what that is.
Another question that is following up with the follicle mites is, how do you get rid of them?
Well, it's very likely that we cannot get rid of follicle mites. These are mites that are very intimately associated with us. As I said, most of us, perhaps all of us humans have them, and they're passed along from generation to generation. There are some people who, for one reason or another, react very strongly to the presence of these mites and may have a condition called rosaceae, which is a reddening of the face, usually the face and sometimes the chest as well. In those cases, doctors can prescribe certain medications that will help to reduce the number of mites, of these follicle mites, and help to eliminate or at least to reduce the incidence of that reddening of the skin, that rosaceae. It's unlikely you can actually eliminate the mites, but those medications the doctors can prescribe, those medications can reduce the number of mites to a much lower level. Great question, though.
We received another question, but now moving away from the follicle mites, more into the mosquitoes. In this term, how do you prevent mosquito bites? And have you guys done any research that has to do with the mosquitoes already?
So as I said, many researchers are working on mosquitoes all the time. There's a lot of research to try to reduce the number of bites that people receive from mosquitoes. So there are a lot of people doing research on various mosquito repellents, for example. But we've also, researchers, that's not in my lab, we don't work with mosquitoes, particularly in my laboratory, but in other labs, certainly mosquitoes are a very important research animal. And people have learned things like mosquitoes like certain odors. Many mosquitoes like the smell of feet, for example. And so they use these odors that are associated with our bodies, particularly odors associated with our feet. And they're attracted to those so they can use those odors to help find us. So there's a lot of people that are doing research to see if we can alter those odors in some way. Or even use those odors as attractive odors, attractive cues to pull the mosquitoes in a different direction, to a different location. So there certainly are a lot of people looking at a lot of different ways that we can reduce the number of bites that we might receive from mosquitoes. And of course, there are a lot of people who are looking at controlling mosquitoes too. So a lot of research goes into trying to reduce the numbers of mosquitoes or at least control the production, the ability for those mosquitoes to reproduce.
Thank you for that. I think that was very insightful. We have another question again from Rosemary Kennedy. How and why do bed bugs get into our bed?
Well, that's a great question. I mentioned earlier that back in the 1950s, we had almost eradicated the bed bug from the United States and actually much of the first world countries. And that's because we used to have an insecticide called DDT and other insecticides that was very long lasting, and people used these insecticides in their homes. And the bed bugs were very susceptible to that insecticide. And so we essentially were able to get rid of bed bugs from all of our homes back then. Prior to that, bed bugs were a normal part of almost everybody's home. And so people were very familiar with them. Now we're seeing bed bugs come back into the United States. But where we're seeing them first often are places where lots of people visit and stay for short periods of time. So when they first began coming back into the United States, the places that we first saw them were in hotels and motels. And for you college students, in college dormitories. So think of places where people, move in and out all the time on a pretty regular basis. And so the way that that the rest of us would bring them into our home is perhaps by visiting one of these locations, and maybe we stay the night there, and we have our luggage, and we put our luggage out on the bed or something. And I told you these bed bugs bite at night and then they hide during the day. Well, it turns out if you stay in a room that has bed bugs and they bite you at night, or they're wandering around at night, and then during the day in the morning, they have to go hide, and some of them might go hide in your luggage. And then, of course, you bring your luggage home, and you open your luggage at home, and now you've introduced the bed bugs to your house and to your bedroom. And so for this reason, we recommend that if you do go to hotels or motels, and you have your luggage, don't put your luggage out on the bed and leave it out on the bed all night. Instead, use the luggage rack that they have in the hotel. And probably most importantly, when you come home, don't bring that luggage to your bedroom, open it all up and take all your clothes out and leave all those clothes in your bedroom. Instead, we recommend that you bring your luggage to your garage, if you have one, or your backyard, open up the luggage there, and then launder all of your clothes before you bring them into the house. And if you do that, it's very likely that you can control or at least reduce the chance that you're going to bring those bed bugs into your home.
That is a great tip. I most definitely will be also using that one and no longer bringing my luggage inside the house. We have another community member, a young one. It's a 5-year-old little boy. And he's asking, why do you get bumps when a mosquito bites you?
Well, that's a great question, especially coming from a 5-year-old, because we don't know entirely why we get these bumps, and different people react to mosquito bites differently. But I think the simple answer is that when the mosquito feeds on you, the mosquito has to spit into that wound site, that bite site. So in order to draw the blood out, first they introduce some of their own saliva, some of their own spit into the wound site. And that helps them to continue pulling blood out of your body. Well, it turns out our bodies react quite strongly to a lot of the components in that spit from the mosquito. And we have an immune response that's localized just around the area of where that bite was. And that immune response makes it get itchy and raise the little welt or little bump that we usually see with a lot of these bites. So that response is actually because of the mosquito spit and our body responding to what's in the mosquito spit.
Thank you for that. Another question from Rosemary Kennedy. Do we really eat bugs when we are asleep?
Well, so if the question is, do the bugs eat us when we're asleep, then yes, they definitely do. Mosquitoes will bite at night as well, many of them, and so they'll bite us at night when we're sleeping. Bed bugs, of course, bite at night when we're sleeping. There are other insects that will bite either day or night. The fleas that we showed you in the presentation, will bite during the day or at night. It depends on the species in some case. But since you mentioned us eating bugs, that's not something I talked about, but maybe something worth mentioning, that there are people all around the world that do eat insects and spiders and other arachnids and arthropods as well. And if we go back far enough in our human history, insects used to be a very common part of our diet. And as our human population increases and continues to get bigger and bigger, we might find that we need to start eating more insects again, because it turns out we can grow a lot of insects in a small amount of space, certainly much less space than it takes us to grow a cow.
Thank you. One of our other questions is, where do people encounter ticks most often, and how can you prevent from encountering a tick?
Great question. So ticks, I would say most people encounter ticks when they're out hiking or walking through a sort of a natural area. Although you can find ticks in some cases in urban areas in people's backyards, that would typically be because ticks have been brought to somebody's backyard, maybe by their own pet, their own animal, a dog, for example, who had already wandered outside, you know, in the forest or in some more natural place. So most of us run into ticks in a natural location, maybe as we're out hiking or backpacking. And knowing that that's where you're most likely to run into ticks, there are some things that you can do to reduce the chance that you will have a tick. The first is to stay on trails. So if you stay on a trail and you don't run your body or run your hand through the vegetation at the edge of the trail, then you're likely not to pick up the ticks, because one of the things the ticks will do to try to find an animal to bite is they'll crawl up on the vegetation, and they get up on the top of the vegetation and they sort of wave their arms back and forth, waiting for somebody to walk past. And so if you're walking through vegetation, or if you're at the edge of the trail and you're touching the vegetation at the edge of the trail, it's very likely that you're going to run into a tick. But if you stay in the middle of the trail and don't touch that vegetation, then it's very unlikely a tick will be able to grab onto you. The other thing that you can do is wear tick repellents. So you can spray tick repellents on your boots and socks and maybe on your pants. And you can buy these tick repellents at hiking and backpacking stores or at Walmart, for example. And these are things that you would spray again on your clothing. The ticks don't like it, so they would start crawling up on you, and then they don't like the smell or the feel of this chemical that you placed on your clothing, and so they'll drop off you instead of biting you.
Now let's say for some reason we did come encounter with a tick. How would you remove the tick from your body?
So if you do encounter a tick, if you check your body very soon after you come out of this natural area where the tick is on you, it's very likely the tick is still going to be wandering around on you. It hasn't found a place to feed yet. And so then it's actually quite easy. You can simply grab the tick between your fingers and remove it. And at this point, you'd probably want to kill it or throw it away. If you're still out in the wilderness, you can just throw it out in the wilderness. If you throw it in your backyard, that might be a mistake, because it might end up on you again. So at that point, you probably want to kill it. You can kill it by freezing it if you want in your own freezer. They're actually quite hard to squeeze between your finger and kill that way. And probably I wouldn't recommend that anyway, because they do carry some pathogens. But you can also put it in a plastic bag, seal it up, throw it in your trash can. That'll work fine too. Back to the question. So let's say you don't notice that tick is on you right away, and it begins to feed. So its head is already embedded now in your skin. The best way to remove the tick at that point is to get a pair of tweezers or forceps. Most of you will call them tweezers. And you want to grab that tick as close to your skin as you can. So you're trying to grab as much of the head that you can. So grab it as close to the skin as you can and just pull it directly out. It may pull a little bit of your skin with it. They're actually really effective. Ticks are very effective at holding on to where they're biting. And so as you pull the tick off, you might get a little of your own skin. But if you grab it close to your skin, you should get all of the tick with you. And then at that point, you can kill that tick.
Thank you. We received another question regarding the kissing bug. Are these bugs can also be found within inside your house?
Yes. So this depends on where you are in the world. So there are many species of kissing bugs. Turns out here in the southeastern part of the United States, the kissing bug species that we have here generally don't live in our homes. They live outdoors, and they're usually associated with other animals like wood rats, for example. But they will bite humans, and they will bite dogs and domestic animals, and they will come into homes from time to time, but they don't live in our homes. If you go down to Central America or South America, on the other hand, there are a number of kissing bug species that actually live inside people's homes and will feed regularly on people. So it really depends on the species of kissing bug that we're talking about.
Alrighty, I think we have one other question. So as a reminder, if you guys have any questions, please be sure to go ahead and put them down below in our comments. So again, this is the question. If you were awake and a bed bug bites you, can you feel it?
If you were awake and a bed bug bites you, would you feel it? That's a good question. I have been bitten by bed bugs when I was awake. In fact, I had a small colony for a little while that I fed on myself until I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And I will tell you that there is a bit of I guess I'll call it a tickle that you would feel, but it's not painful. Some insects that bite you can actually be quite painful, and that's because they have mouth parts that cut into your skin. But bed bugs are more like mosquitoes, so they can feed on you without you really feeling it too much. So you'll feel a little bit of an irritation or maybe an itchy sensation, even if you're awake. If you're asleep, you probably feel nothing at all. You won't even wake up from it. And if you think about the evolution of this insect, because it feeds at night, it really wants its host to stay asleep. So it has evolved to be a pretty painless biter. It doesn't want to wake you up. It doesn't want to cause a lot of pain. That would be detrimental for the bed bug to get that blood meal. So yeah, you can feel it, but not very much.
Alrighty, well, at this time, we no longer have any questions. I would just like to say thank you so much for doing this for us today. For anybody who is watching, we will be having some more live panel presentations that will be following. We have a second one today at 2 p.m., all things pollination, and then a few more for the following days coming up ahead. So thank you again, Dr. Gary. We appreciate your time and your efforts.
Of course, you bet. Happy to have done it, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with this audience. And thanks you all for the great questions that you had. And Crystal, did you need me for anything else?
Nope, I think we're good. I think we're just going ahead and closing it out.
Okay, perfect.
All right,
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.